Well, I'm happy you're here. You are one, let me just say, one of the oldest friends of the pod because I think you've been the first time you came on the Nerds of Color to talk about Batman was like 10 years ago. So and you keep
Mm.
coming back. So I appreciate that. I am here with my friend, a writer. You've seen his work on Castle Rock and Masters of the Universe, Star Trek Picard, and now on the awesome Batman Caped Crusader animated series. In fact, I was watching the screeners, and when I saw your name pop up during episode 6, I shot you a text real quick. I was like, yo, welcome, Marc Bernardin.
Hey man, how are you?
I am so excited to talk about this show, man. And first of all, before we even get into like the ins and outs of the particular series that you're working on, just how did you get the call to do a Bruce Timm animated Batman series, and how quietly did you freak out when you got that call?
I mean, it was it was a weird one because I I don't remember what the hell I was working on at the time. It was during the pandemic. It was during the lockdown, I think. I'd have to go back and do the date archiving to see exactly when it happened. And because animation has such an intense lead time, it was easy 3 years ago when I did this, and I wasn't in the writer's room. There was a staff that Bruce Timm and Ed Brubaker put together. But I got a text from Brubaker. It was just like, "Hey man, you want to write an episode of Batman?" And I said, "Yes, yes, Ed, I would like to write an episode of Batman." Batman has eluded me my entire time working for DC. Um, and so if you're going to be the dude who lets me write an episode of Batman, I will let you do that. And he was like, "Yeah, I mean, we had a staff. We broke a bunch of episodes. There's a couple of members of the staff who were leaving to go off and like run a TV show or make a movie. I don't remember exactly what their deal was." He's like, "But I have a couple of episodes. Would you be interested in like Gentleman Ghost?" And I said, "You know, yeah, Ed. Basically, it's my Kevin Smith rule, which is if somebody, that I like and respect comes to me and says, 'Hey, you want to do a thing?' The answer is always yes. Like, hey man, you want to write an episode of Batman? Yeah. Yeah,
With
and I
Batman just happened to be the cherry on the sundae, I guess, right?
for real, it's like getting to work with Ed, who I had met Ed at a Wildstorm going away party for somebody. I think it was like Ben Abernathy was leaving Wildstorm and going to DC proper.
This
And
is
they had
years
this
ago.
years and years ago. Like, and he had, left Wildstorm, went on to Marvel, did the Winter Soldier, then left there and then took his bag and went to like Criminal. I think it's what it was. And just like played pool with him for like an hour and just a very cool dude. And one of the first people I met in comics who I thought was 1,000 years older than he is. Like Ed Brubaker sounds like an old man's name.
Yeah, he's of our generation, I think.
Yeah, like the author photo was like him in a pork pie hat, kind of out of focus. I was like, is he 65 years old? Has he been writing pulp novels for most of his life? It's like, no, he's in his mid 30s and he's just a nerd like everybody else is. Um, and so getting to work with him on Batman, getting to work with Bruce Timm on Batman, like so much of that was a no-brainer because
It's almost
yeah,
like pinch yourself kind of stuff, right? Like,
yeah, it's like, the Batman that I see in my head is Michael Keaton. The Batman that I hear is Kevin Conroy. And so to get notes from Bruce Timm, to get to talk story and Batman with Bruce Timm was like, hey man, I will write as many drafts as you need if at the end of these drafts I get to sit down and talk to Bruce about Batman.
that. I mean, it's kind of like as a long. I mean, clearly you can see I kind of like Batman a little
Yeah,
bit,
no, I can there's some evidence.
just a little bit. This indie character that I glommed onto a couple years ago. But the idea that like you get to write, I'm assuming Batman's. Is it fair to say he's your favorite fictional comic character, or is that a stretch? Because
Um,
like, I feel like you're only on here to ever talk about Batman, so I don't know
I know,
why.
right? It's funny because I grew up a Marvel kid.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, we can't all be
most,
perfect.
yeah, and most of that's because I grew up in New York.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like
Real
the
New York
idea,
versus fake New York is always trumps the.
right. So like if I could go to where the Baxter Building was, or I can go to where the Sanctum Sanctorum was, or find the Bodegan Queens that Peter Parker would get his sandwiches from, like that does make it a more tangible
Sure.
um reality then like Metropolis is this, but it's also Gotham and they're both New York, and I don't understand, but sure. Um, but Batman was my first DC comics, hero. Like I went over for the Dark Knight. Like I went over because I've been reading Daredevil with Frank Miller. He's doing Batman. Let me go see what that's all about. And Batman Year One and Dark Knight. Like that was the move.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, to be able to some 40 years later find a way into like, hey, you want to write Batman?
Well,
Yeah.
like you said, I mean, you've done comics work for DC in the past, and the Batman is the crown jewel. It's like Batman and Superman, of course, are the two oldest
Mhm.
superheroes of all time, and they are the grandpas of the culture that we, you know, partake in. But the fact that it took you 40 years to write a Batman story, and not only just any old, no shade to comics. If I got the chance to write a Batman comic, I would freak out. But to your point earlier, you got a chance to write an episode of the spiritual successor to Batman the Animated Series, the greatest animated series of all time, I think is
Yeah.
fair to say. And and we'll talk about the ins and outs of this particular series, but you mentioned that you weren't in the room, so you kind of just got was given this episode. Because one of the questions I had was whose idea was to bring in Pop at Midnight? Whose idea was it to do Gentleman Ghost? Like, so you already had the villain, and then you just had to build a story around it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the what I got when I showed up was about a page and a half of like, here's kind of what the episode is. Like it's Gentleman Ghost. We know, and Ed teased me with like, we can do Papa Midnight. Do you want to roll with Papa Midnight? I was like, yes, yes, I do. If I can touch, basically, can I make this episode of Batman the Animated, the Cape Crusader, the blackest episode of Batman that ever was? Then yes, let's find a way to do that.
Right, because very
And
Lucius Fox heavy episode as well.
Lucius Fox, Papa Midnight, like it's all about class and the disenfranchised and even Bruce's role as sort of a prince of the city and what he believes his responsibilities are. Um, and so the page and a half that I got, some of that was baked in there already. And like some of it was about, Lucius Fox is buying this apartment complex that's going to run him against the Gentleman Ghost. Um, Bruce is going to have to go to Papa Midnight for help, for guidance. Um, and then a little bit of the framing of what the Gentleman Ghost's deal was. But a lot of that ended up developing through the writing was the how much can we push this? Can it be about race? Can it be about class? Are those kind of the same thing in a city like Gotham? So it was never
It's
like,
interesting too, just real quick. I'm glad you mentioned race because some of the, criticism, let's say, for lack of a better euphemism, of the series thus far, it's only been out for a week, but,
mhm,
hot takes will abound when anything comes out. And what I found interesting is that the critique of the show from both left and right, interestingly, is this hypothetical 40s where like race, gender, and sexuality are not the what we think of 40s fiction, right? Because like there are
mhm,
people of color in various states of power. There's like out gay women going on dates. There's female gender swapped characters. And I actually, I mean, I'm also a fan of Hamilton, as you can see. Like, I kind of dug the fact that it's this alternate universe 40s where race, gender, sexuality isn't negative, for lack of a better word, right? Like it's
mhm.
just baked into the cake. But you raised the point that like your episode is still about race, even though race is not the construct that it is in the real world. Can you talk a little bit about one, what is what how much you knew about like this version, this alternate mirror history of the United States, and how much you were able to inject like your own perspective in that?
Yeah, I mean, Ed did tell me right away that like, yeah, we're playing with with gender and race in ways that, will seem a little anachronistic to the when we're setting the story. But then again, Batman has always been anachronistic, especially Batman animated, where
Right.
we have dirigibles and we have,
Cell phones.
computers, but we don't have cell phones. Like it's always a bit of a hodgepodge anyway. And I've always been, I remember reading this interview with George R. R. Martin talking about Game of Thrones, where he was specifically the criticism about how much sexual violence was done to women on his show. And he was like, well, that's what the time was. Like we're talking about, the parallel is the 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 end of the dark ages of England. And like, yeah, women got the shit end of the stick, 100% of the time. And my feeling was always, yeah, but it's only because you want it to be there.
Right.
You have dragons. Dragons means it's not the real world. And then everything that you then keep from that version of the real world is by choice,
Yeah.
and so once you decide what the break you're going to have with history as we know it, you can choose whatever you want to inflect and inform that world with. And so like, yeah, it's still the 40s. Yeah, it's still a post slash pre-war economy. Yeah, there's still, there's no computers, there's no cell phones, there's no this things. But maybe in this world, we don't have the same hangups about, you know, gender and sexuality and race as we might have. Maybe we are 100 years further down the road than we were in the prime timeline as we know it. And like that's what fiction's for.
Yeah.
That's what fantasy is for. Like if you can't take these big swings about a dude dressed like a bat who fights crime, then when can you take big swings?
Well, and then like your episode in particular, like I think of all of the episodes of this season, the 10 episodes we got, yours is the most fantastical because yours deals with like literal. It's not like a Scooby Doo where you take his mask off and it's just a guy, in a costume. It's like he's literally the
He's a go.
reincarnation of a centuries dead, nobleman. And so like if you can accept that conceit, but where you draw the line is, but yeah, Lucius Fox should not have be a high powered lawyer in the 1940s. Then it kind of you're kind of showing your ass, and
Right.
how I
And
view it.
that Lucius Fox can't come from a family that also had servants,
Right.
you know, or at the very least had hired help, because Lucius comes from a place of experience where it's like, well, I was raised to that the help were human beings who worked in the house with us, who we would talk to as equals to a certain degree. Like they were employees, but not servants. And so being able to wrap our heads around all of that felt like, yeah, yeah. Like it's interesting. And I think that Ed specifically, and I know Bruce definitely have part of the radar, the compass by which they plot their stories is what's interesting. If it's interesting, let's tack towards it. If it seems kind of not interesting, then we'll tack away from it.
Because I feel like the notion that if you're going to set a story in the kind of like the film noir 40s, but you're going to stick to like, okay, we got to stick to what the societal hierarchy was at that time. You're basically saying we cannot put brown and black people in this show. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And why can't brown and black people kind of imagine themselves in a gumshoe detective story? You know what I'm saying? I think that's the divide because I said it. You get kind of shit from the left and right. The writer, I said this in my review. I already predicted the YouTube thumbnails as soon as I watched the first screener. I was like, oh, I can see the typical usual suspects going off. But then some of the criticism from the left I've read is that like they do kind of touch on race, but they don't, and it's I wish they touched on race more. And it's like, can we just go with the conceit that that's not the most important thing right now? It's there, and what's important is the perspective of you have a black commissioner, you have an Asian therapy. Like therapy wouldn't even be a thing in the 40s, probably, right? And then that was my view of it. Like I accepted the conceit right away, and it allowed me to really like immerse myself in the
It's
environment.
if you got a hammer, you see the world as a nail, and it's like, hey, if you want to talk about that, if you want it to be about that, sure, have that conversation. But I think it's actually a more useful conversation if we're not hitting everything on the head. If this is just the fabric of the world that
Yeah,
that Bruce Wayne lives in, and that it goes uncommented upon by the show
right.
is more impactful for me than if it becomes a very special episode about X,
Absolutely.
and like this is probably the closest it comes to a very special episode about X in that we're talking about class for real and we're talking about um perspectives on the divide between them, but it is still a ghost story. It is still Batman trying to solve a crime. It is still, Batman needing help and turning to allies. It is still, we're casting a spell, you know, and it is still Batman slash Bruce Wayne discovering how much he doesn't know about Alfred
Yeah.
and how much Alfred actually means to him in
Yeah.
ways that he has never been able to access before.
That's my favorite part of the episode is because like I made a joke in my review that the series on the whole kind of draws a lot, makes a lot of allusions to other Batman media. I feel like there's a lot of kind of like callbacks, of course, the classic comics or some like pertinent stuff in there that's just pulling from the original animated series. There's some Nolan stuff that's in there, and I joke that the big Matt Reeves kind of stuff in the series is that Bruce is a dick to Alfred the entire time. That's what I got from Pattinson Batman. But I love that your episode is the first time Bruce is like, "Oh wait, Alfred means something to me," and I love that about. Was that all you, or was that kind of
No, it
a
was very much
dictated from
Bruce. You know, they pitched me Batman as Spock, you know, sort of at this emotional reserve that he didn't quite understand, that he's somewhere on the spectrum, especially specifically in regards to his emotional aptitude. Like he can be emotional when he's putting it on, when it's part of his Bruce Wayne disguise, but at his core, he does not know how to make those interpersonal connections and is blind to almost every cue about them.
right.
And so the idea that it takes Alfred to be in literally the door of death for him to realize that his life is better with him in it, and that maybe he could do to ask a question or two about this man who's raised him you know, from 9 or 10 years old. Like, I didn't know this about you. I didn't. Well, you should ask, Master Bruce. I didn't. Oh, all right.
Yeah. No, so it's a fascinating series. And when you were brought on, I know you were brought on just to do this one episode. How much of the other episodes were you kind of given a peek into? Because it is episodic, but there is a through line throughout the season, I would say. Like the Harvey Dent stuff is clearly
Yeah,
like, the long game. But it is a traditional kind of like you can tune in, you don't need to know any, it's not serialized in the traditional
right.
sense.
I mean, I
But how
knew, I
much of the
knew,
other season did you know about?
I knew specifically what was happening in episode 5 and what was happening in episode 7. Not that there was to your point, it's not serialized. So they needed to like shake hands and carry plot forward.
Right.
And the Dent stuff is really the at least for me, the only ongoing story that needed to be fed.
Yeah.
That like, all right, he's going to go here. We need to show him desperate here. So he turns to Thorn by the end of it here. It's like, okay, that's cool. But Ed was like, ooh, let me tell you the bad guys. Ooh, let me tell you who we're doing. Like Ed was a kid in a candy store, which was so excited. Um, and he specifically was like, oh, you got to tell Kevin that we're doing onomatopoeia.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, okay, are you sure? He's like, why? Do you think there's gonna be a problem? I'm like, listen, I don't, I don't know. I don't think so. I think he'll be flattered because
Yeah.
the character that he created with Tim Seeley, made it into animation. Like, yeah, with Bruce Timm is that like he'll be thrilled.
I mean,
Which
he
he
named
will,
his daughter after a creation of Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, so I think it just
like
turned about
he
as fair play,
100%
right?
is dyed in the wool a Batman fan. Um, and he was just tickled pink by it. But it was, this was whatever, 3 years ago. So these are all secrets that I couldn't wait to not have to keep.
How soon did Kevin know about it? Were you spilling the beans behind the
I
scenes
was
of
spilling the beans.
Batman?
Like I kind of we never did it on the show.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
but
said behind the scenes, of
it
course.
was
I
behind the
don't want
scenes.
to I don't want you to get in trouble with any NDAs being on this Rinky Dink podcast.
No, no, yeah, it was all like once Ed told me I could tell Kevin, I was like, all right, I'm gonna tell Kevin.
So it was never an option for you to do onomatopoeia, right? Like you were already.
It was already like I think Ed, like I'm not sure. Maybe it was Rucka. Um, because I have to go back and rewatch everything just to see because like you want to see it pretty, you want to see all the sound in it, you want to see all the effects done.
Well, so that was another question. Like, having this, well, you've written Master of the Universe, so it's not like you've never
Mhm.
done animation, but like, how, because you write it and then they animate, of course, after you write it, and that process is years long. Like, are you kind of like brought in at every stage to see like the initial like
It
sketches and.
depends. It depends on the show and it depends on the role within the show. Um, to date, all of the animation I've done has been as like a freelance gunslinger, right? Like Masters of the Universe, like I was part of the story group that helped build out that season. I wrote my episode. I would see some design work along the way. I think I saw some early animatics, but then that was it. Vox Machina, the Critical Role thing, I again was in a room for a week. I wrote an episode, and they didn't show me anything until it was done, because I think that that is, and same with Batman. Like I wrote my episode and went off into the wild world, and just kept on doing what I do, and I saw almost nothing from it until I saw the finished product. And I feel like if I'm on a staff for an animated show, um, then you're part of that process a little bit
Hmm.
closer. Like I've seen some of the Eyes of Wakanda stuff,
Hmm.
um, because I was on that show for 40 weeks or
Right,
so,
right.
and so I've seen some both test footage and early animatic stuff, and I've seen some character designs, and I've seen some rough passes at things. And it's, I mean, dude, when they can start showing you that shit, it'll blow your doors off. Um, but it's always different. Each show is
Yeah,
different, but by and large, it is. I came in, I did my work, and I mustered out and joined another infantry somewhere to take another hill for somebody else.
nice. Yeah, yeah. Like you're the Merc with a pen, I guess. Not. So, I'm assuming you've seen the other 9 episodes since
I
the
haven't
show
seen all of
dropped.
them. I've been like gently sort of parsing them out. I've been trying to do what TV should do, which
Yes,
is make this a serialized, a pulp experience where I'm gonna watch an
absolutely.
episode, let it sit, watch an episode, let it sit, and not blaze through it like a
Yeah, no,
myth.
I'm with you. I actually I think all streaming should go the way of, the old school TV once a week because that's how you get the conversation.
Hmm.
The problem, like, people don't talk about TV anymore because no one, like, I love The Bear and I'm taking my time watching it, but it's hard to like engage in the pop culture conversation because now it's like season 3 was shit. And I'm like, I'm only like 3 episodes in. It's good so far. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
like where does the shit show up?
So where are you in terms of how much you've actually seen of the finished product?
Um, oh, well, I saw my episode first
Of course.
because I'm like, duh, who are we kidding here? And then I've seen the first episode. Um, and then I'm slowly making my way through.
So just the those 2 episodes alone, you already know the vibe and how it's different yet similar to the original.
Hmm.
What's your take on, like the original Batman animated series is such a, lodestone in animation and comics and nerd culture. For Bruce Timm to come back and, I was purposefully trolling our friends at Marvel by claiming that this show was the superior 90s cartoon revival, taking a shot at X-Men. And but I said that lovingly because, I just happen to be a Batman guy more than an X-Men guy. But, we are in a world where we're like revisiting these iconic 90s cartoons and doing so in a way that's like the target audience is the kids who watched it 30 years ago and not necessarily the kids today. And what
Hmm.
I appreciate about like the Batman show is that there was a world where, because it's on Amazon and originally was supposed to be on HBO Max, that you could have just gone grimdark for grimdark's sake, blood everywhere, nudity, cursing. And I actually appreciate that you guys kept it at least in the TV-14 realm and made the line I said in the review I wrote is that it's mature without being quote unquote for mature audiences. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
Just talk to me about like the evolution from the 90s show to this one, from what you've seen so far and what you've experienced, working.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is very much. I mean, one of the things that I took from the first conversation with I had with Ed about it was I think he called it like Disney PG,
Hmm.
in that like, you know, The Incredibles is an incredibly mature film.
Yeah.
Like it's about stuff. And those things are not for kids per se.
Right.
It's about middle-age crisis. It's about a failing marriage. It's about secrets. It's about, impotence. It's about all of these things. It is also about superheroes.
Hmm.
And so I think that the idea that you can tell mature stories to an audience without them having to A, be dumbed down in any way, and B, somehow isolate and sidestep the intended audience, which is like kids. Like it's Batman. If you make a Batman that a kid can't go see, you failed at making Batman. Same with Superman. Like he's Superman, guys. Like do not try so hard to run away from what it is. Um, and so for Bruce to understand and for Ed to understand, yes, we can tell mature stories with mature themes, but they are, one of, if not the intended audience is children. They need to be able to sit down and watch this. And their parents need to be able to sit down with them and take something different from it.
Yeah.
Because that is always how, what has now been called co-viewing has always been. Like I took different stuff from Raiders of the Lost Ark when I first saw it than my dad did,
Hmm.
or than my mom did, because they grew up, with serials and they grew up with, screwball comedies and they grew up with, His Girl Friday. And I was growing up, like I had no context for it.
You
This
hadn't
is just
grown
awesome,
up.
and so I think that intention, that desire to like let's understand what the job is. Let's understand what the mission that we're trying to accomplish is. And if we start to veer from it, if you start to creep away from that mission, then we're missing an opportunity to like encapsulate and invigorate and entertain an audience while still getting to tell the kinds of Batman stories that we like to tell, which are complicated and noir and violent, but not gory,
Hmm.
that have um, that have sexual urgency to them if they're not sexy. You know what I mean? Like we're not going to be explicit, but yeah, it's Catwoman, you guys. Like yeah, it's Harley. Like duh. Um, and I think that sort of thing is important. And I think it's, much like X-Men 97, which I have said before and will continue to say, I hear it's amazing. I haven't seen it
Right.
because X-Men, it wasn't my jam as a
Same.
kid. And so maybe at some point I will sit down with it and engage with it, on its own terms. But nostalgia doesn't work for me in that regard,
Yes.
whereas it very much works for me in this regard.
Absolutely.
Like, you 100% could have, you know, animated up with Batman if you wanted to. You could have found some animation house that would have made it the most gorgeous, the most high tech, the most scintillatingly precise animation you've ever seen. But then it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Hmm.
You know, it isn't Bruce Timm doing
Right.
Batman anymore. It doesn't have the Tim, it doesn't have the Alex Toth vibes. It doesn't have any of the heritage that Bruce inherited as an animator and a storyteller. And it just becomes its own weird ass thing. And I don't think anybody wanted that.
Yeah.
And so I think that melding of the ethos and the desire and the fidelity to what it used to be, while still pushing it content wise. Um, it was exciting to be even the smallest part of.
Yeah. No, I mean it's one of like I've also trolled fellow Batman fans by telling them that I think this is better than BTAS, y'all. And I say that just because what I mean by that is I feel like this is the Batman Bruce always wanted to do. Even like if he could have done this in 1992 and Fox Kids let him, this is how he would
Mhm.
have done Batman. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the vibe I get from the show.
I mean, I think that there's also like BTAS is great. The greatest episodes of that show can be held up next to the greatest episodes of any other show in any medium ever. That said, they made so many of those shows.
Exactly.
And like if you're making what it was like 35 a year,
Yeah,
I
season one
think
was like 65 episodes, I think, at that
yeah, like it's an immense amount of lifting to do. They're not all bangers,
right.
you know. And so, like, yeah, are there some bad episodes of BTAS? Yeah, we don't talk about them much because there's a lot of them.
Right.
But so I think the hit ratio is higher when you're just doing 10 and you're able to like, what are the 10 we should do? Here, okay, great. Here's the ones, here's what we're saying. We're going to invest all of our time and energy and enthusiasm in these 10 as opposed to having to service 60, like, which itself is a Herculean task
Yeah,
that will never be done again because it's
right.
insane.
TV doesn't operate that way anymore. No one even
No,
does 22 episode seasons anymore.
and that any of those were good is a miracle. that as many as were good is a gift. But um but yeah, it is just it's a different beast. And I
Yeah.
think Bruce and Ed understood that going in. Like, all right, 10 of these. Let's make these the 10 best episodes of Batman that we can.
And let's tease like the next 10 because you can't end a Batman series without teasing the no spoilers. It's funny I'm saying no spoilers as someone who wrote on the show, but there's a great tease. Anyone who hasn't seen all 10, make sure you stay to the end of the last episode because there's a nice tease for next season. And I'm
Mm.
assuming we're getting next season. I don't know that primer. I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of funny about the show is that you know, David Zaslav in all his infinite wisdom decided not to actually keep it on HBO Max, which was the original announcement. And,
Yeah, I
thank God
mean,
for
like,
Amazon, right?
I will give Zaslav endless amounts of shit for a coterie of reasons. But and it still it does boggle the mind that there's a Batman show that is not on a Warner Brothers owned network. However, the idea of a studio as an arms dealer whose job it is to make things and then get money for the things that they make is not ridiculous.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
Sony
this is
operates.
not a Batgirl situation. He didn't shove it under
He
the,
didn't he didn't kill it. He didn't, strangle it. It's just like, hey, can we sell this to somebody who will pay for it? And like, while I'll say I don't love it, I can't hate on it as a business decision because that is what studios used to do before they were all vertically integrated. Like you made a thing, you sold a thing. Somebody gave
yeah.
you money, they aired a thing, and that's the way it worked.
I mean, the BTAS was on Fox. Let's not forget, right? It wasn't the CW or whatever that
Yeah, or the
aired BTAS.
WB. Like it's who paid us this money, then let's go get that money. Um, and for Amazon to like A, see that it was good and B, embrace it and push it. And I think they also bought the rights to all of BTAS to air it as this giant Batman suite that they can then sell comic books and graphic novels and toys and merch off of. Like it it
Yeah.
it does make a lot of sense for a lot of
Well,
people.
we mentioned earlier too, like the like streaming kind of upended how we consume television anyway. And I
Hmm.
think for a good long while, it kind of became, to your point, the opposite of how TV used to be, where like everyone just owned their own content and
Yeah.
everything made by Warner Brothers was on Max and everything owned by Disney was on Disney Plus and everything on NBC was Peacock and never shall the twain meet. And now we're starting to get, now like Disney and Max are offering bundles where it's like you can get Disney, ESPN, Max, all. It's just like, isn't it just cable? Aren't we just saying cable all over
Do
again?
cable again. And the math I'm sure had told them that we will not see an adequate enough rise in new subscribers by having a Batman show than we would for however X number of dollars that another outlet will pay us to have a Batman show. Now, Batman Cape Crusader is the number one show on Amazon, dethroning the boys.
Yeah, which
I
is
have
wild.
to imagine that there is still some monetary value there. That to then have had the number one show on Max probably wouldn't have been a bad thing.
Right.
Um, but I have no idea what.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Like, I think it was more along the lines of like when they first announced that, oh, we're not moving forward with Cape Crusader. And it's like, do you not like money? And to your point, it's like, no, they do like money. That's why they're doing it.
Right.
But it took a while before Prime Video said they were taking it. And I think that in between time was just like, how do you not just greenlight a Bruce
Yeah.
Tim Batman show?
Yeah. But I remember, talking with Ed about it, like as it was happening. And he was like, they're still paying us. Like we're still
Mhm.
making the show. It'll be somewhere. We just don't know where.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I think just to put us back in that time period, I don't know, like 2022 or whatever, when they said, "Oh, there's a Batgirl movie where Michael Keaton comes back, directed by the guys who did Bad Boys, and that's not releasable," you kind of feel like anything is possible at that point.
Anything is
Like,
possible. But
uh,
there's this great Kids in the Hall documentary. I think it's on Hulu. No, it's not Kids in the Hall. My bad. It's the Dana Carvey show when he had his variety show after he left SNL, went to like ABC, and like Steve Carell and John Oliver and um um
I think
it
Mulaney
was
wrote
like
on that show, right?
yeah, it was like the Daily Show's greatest hits. Ultimately, all of those guys ended up over at like Stephen Colbert. We're all in the writers' room and in the cast of this Dana Carvey show. And they launched with great aplomb and then disappeared off the ratings almost immediately. And I think it's like Colbert was like, they never tell you that you're canceled. Just they stop stocking the fridge. Like there's no new snacks, there's no new pencils, there's no new stationery. Just like, did we just get yeah, yeah, we
Mhm.
did. It's like they'll never tell you that you're canceled, but they're still paying everybody's checks, right? Like there's still soda in the fridge, right? That I guess we're still making a cartoon.
Yeah. Well, so I know that you said you wrote your episode and they had been working on this since during the pandemic. So it's been 4 years that it took to get from pen to screen. I don't know how much you know about a second season or not, but if we were to get a second season and Ed sends you another text and says, "Hey, I got another episode for you." What's your wish list for the rogues that you would want to write for, and in whatever sub? Not to jinx it, and so let me just
Right.
make that clear. But if
Um,
this conversation hasn't already happened, who would you want to write for season two?
I've always been a sucker for Raj Al Ghul.
Mm.
Like there's something about um the intellectual battle between those two men. It is less about fisticuffs, it's less about force. It's more about, and there's a respect between them that I always appreciated. It felt very like Count of Monte Cristo to me. And so to get to swing at that, to get to swing at like this dude who respects Batman enough to call him detective and only to call him detective, even though he's pretty sure he knows who his real name is, because of course he does. Um, like I think that would be fun. That would be fun. And then to treat that character with, you know, he then becomes less like Dr. Zhivago. He less becomes, less, you know, um, Christopher Plummer. And more like, yeah, let's fucking treat him like he's a Middle Eastern genius because of course he is. Because of course there were. The huge lineage and history of advanced education in the Middle East is a thing that, pop culture likes to ignore because it suits them. But like 100% do that. Like lean into it.
And he's
Um,
the perfect character to fit that milieu of what Cape Crusader is doing as well, right? Like it's almost a
yeah,
shock that he's not in season one.
yeah. So if the call ever came, and it's like, hey, who do you want to do? Here's who we have, fanning out the cards like some kind of, crazy animation dealer. And pick a card, any card. I think the card that I try to pick is Ra's al Ghul.
That's I would love to see a Marc Bernardin penned Ra's al Ghul Cape Crusader episode.
Yeah. Or Ra's. I
One
like to
other
say
kind of like
Ross, but it's his Raish.
Raz Raish. Well, if it's Tim, I feel like it would be Raish because that's how he was called in the 30 years ago. I think it was Nolan that made it Raz, right?
Yeah, it is so much one of those things that for so many of us only existed as a thing you read on paper
Right.
with no confirmation the pronunciation at
Yeah,
all.
it's R apostrophe AS. That's all I knew it as, right?
Yeah, that's race, Ross. Sure.
So one other kind of like since we're dealing in hypotheticals and fantasies, I don't think the Cape Crusader universe is one in which the Justice League exists. But if it did, if we were to get Justice League Unlimited kind of versions in this, which which Justice Leaguer would you like to see do a cameo in a future season of Cape Crusader? I say that only because I don't know how, and you may have insight in this. Someone posted a photo that said that one of the reporters looked astonishingly like the Fleischman Lois Lane. And this
Mhm.
does kind of live in a world in which the Fleischman Superman could show up, you know, if Bruce Timm is listening. But is there a Justice Leaguer that you would like to see get the Cape Crusader treatment?
Um, there's two. I feel like Green Arrow is the closest compatriot to Batman in
Sure.
the just a guy.
Great
I'm just
value Batman, I think is what he
yeah,
was called.
yeah. Like I'm a rich dude who has a belt and a cave. Um, and so I think that weird dark competition between those two to be both princes of their respective cities. And then when forced to collision, it's like you're just a mere image of me. You're the one who never got a hug from his parents, aren't you, Bruce? I'm rich and totally well adjusted.
Right.
I just think that would be fun from an almost like Midnight Run perspective of
Yeah.
just like buddy cop with with Green Arrow and Batman. But I also think there could be something super interesting about Martian Manhunter.
Mm.
Um,
Well, he
because
fits
I
the
think
gumshoe detective.
the gumshoe detective stuff, and again, getting to talk a little bit about race, which I think Martian Manhunter has leaned into in the past. Um, as an alien trying to figure out how the world works, what is the value difference between choosing which face to put on and which face
Mhm.
not to put on? Like, how much easier is it for me to get through life if I'm this versus that? You know, and I think that element of Martian Manhunter has always been interesting. And then to get to play with that in the detective milieu and in the noir milieu is always super fun. Um,
I mean, we need Justice League Cape Crusader now. I mean, that wouldn't be the proper subtitle, but like that's what I'm going with right now, just because. I mean, and Bruce Timm's history with Martian Manhunter is awesome because some of my favorite Justice League episodes were the Martian Manhunter ones, especially the one where he and Clark go visit Smallville for Christmas. That's like I think one of the best Justice League episodes.
yeah.
Um,
And also, like, that is still a Gotham City where there are fires on the regular. Like, the 30s and 40s were just lousy with factories on fire all the
yeah,
time.
exactly. And Firebug makes a
Firebug.
he can make a return. Well, Mark, thank you so much for hopping on. Like I said, as soon as I saw your name pop up on episode 6, I shot you a message right away and was like, "Whoa!" So I was very happy for you to come in and share the experience
Always a pleasure, man.
working on Batman. Can you tell our viewers what you got coming up? I know you just finished San Diego. You did a bunch of stuff there.
A
What's
bunch of
on the
stuff there.
horizon?
So let's see. Just dropped the trade paperback collection of Census, this book that I did with Adam Freeman, Comixology. Dark Horse collected it as a trade, so that's out now. I'm working on my distillery, my launch book with them called Shepherd with Ariella Cristantina. And so that should hopefully be out, top of next year, I think. And then prepping my second distillery book, which will be later next year, maybe 26, Eyes of Wakanda, which a little birdie has told me they're going to show off at D23.
Oh,
Um,
because there was nothing at Comic Con about it, was there?
Nothing at Comic-Con. Yeah, Marvel Animation didn't have a big panel. So I think they were saving it for D23. So hopefully everybody will get a first look at it then. And that's not till next year, I don't think. Um, and I think TV wise, that's it. Um, but yeah, man, there's the litany of stuff that I can't talk about yet that is in various stages of completion and or development. But it's lots of things hold promise.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll come back when we see some scenes from Wakanda, Eyes of Wakanda to talk about
Happy
if the
to.
Disney overlords let you. Um,
We'll see how restrictive they end up being at
yeah,
the end
they
of
may
the
be a little bit more unwilling to have people like sound off on what's not out yet. But and you can always find Mark on Fat Man Beyond, which I think is a weekly
well, it,
ish.
let's call it a regularly irregular podcast.
Yeah, I know what that's like. Trust me. But no, but thanks so much. And if you haven't check out, make sure if you watch one episode of Batman Cape Crusader, it's the Gentleman Ghost one because our friend Marc Bernardin wrote it. So
Oh,
thanks so
thank
much for being on the show.
My
In the
pleasure.
lectures, fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC. In full color, you see me. The hard knock life, comics, movies, and TV. Yeah, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.